Hello everybody, my name is Tristan, and today I'll be talking about a subtopic within alcoholism. But first off, I'd like to start out with a statistic from projectknow.com. In the United States, nearly 14 million adults, or every 1 in 13 adults, abuse alcohol or have an alcoholism problem. Some people address this issue as a disease, while others address this issue as a choice. My proposition, however, is based off one's social environment, alcoholism is in fact a choice rather than disease. I'm sure you all know what a disease and alcoholism is, but to be more clear with my definitions, I'd like to explain what they are. Disease is a disorder of structure or function in a human, animal, or plant, especially one that produces specific symptoms or that affects a specific location, is not simply a direct result of physical injury. Alcoholism is addiction to the consumption of alcoholic drinks. So I have 3 reasons to believe why alcoholism is in fact a choice. First off, alcoholism is fully defined as a disease. Second off, there is a scientific study that explains why alcoholism is in fact more of a choice than anything. It really shows how science can prove that. And my third point, we go back into history to see how alcoholism affected others back then and how it was a choice for them as well. So my first topic, I would like to use basic logic. And so it can be said that people simply can't choose to receive leukemia or ALS or epilepsy. But people can choose to, drink, they can choose to consume alcohol. A disease is procured by mishap. It's not intentional. Otherwise, alcohol is intentional. It's not, a disease is not from conscious decision making. Therefore, alcoholism can't be described as a true disease, but a choice involving power within that drinker. When alcoholism is defined as a disease, power is taken away from the drinker to choose their lifestyle. It makes the recovery process much harder for them because they have no choice. This is not to say that alcoholics do not need support. Alcoholics must be given support, including giving them the power to choose. This all points to the studies that I'm about to explain. So as I just said, alcoholism is a result of loss of power or choice making. In Professor Bruce Alexander's Rat Park, he conveys the power of choices and isolation. And here's where I explain one of his quotes. I'd like to explain what the scientific experiment is. So he has 2 sets of rats. Some are isolated, they have no friends, no exercise equipment, there's an isolated box. They're given water or a drug solution to drink from. And in the other box, there's rats and they have a social interaction. It's more inviting. There's exercise equipment and it's a lot more inviting for the rats. And they also have alcohol or water. So what he states from his experiments is in virtually every experiment, rats in solitary confinement consumed more drug solution by every measure we could devise. And not just a little more, a lot more. And here I'm going to refer to a chart that he wrote up. Isolated rats with no social or physical environment consumed almost 13 milligrams of morphine solution on average per day. Rats that were exposed to a more open, social, and playful environment consumed an average about 2 milligrams per day. As you can see, the difference there is major. So you might be asking, how in the world could you compare rats to an actual human, right? So this is where we go back into history to see how this experiment is proven for humans. So we look back to the history of the Native Americans, and here's where he explains in his research. There was so little addiction that is very difficult to prove from written and oral histories that it existed at all. But once the native people were colonized, alcoholism became close to universal. There were entire reserves where virtually every teenager and adult was either an alcohol or drug addict or on the wagon. So as you can see, when the option to drink is there, and that's more of a comforting thing than being oppressed, they're obviously going to choose to drink alcohol. This is why when you work with the alcoholic, you must give them support. You must give them another comforting thing to choose. They have to have more options in order to choose a better option for life. So I'd like to go back to my 3 last points. So like I said, you can't really define alcoholism as a disease, truly, because it takes power away from the drinkers themselves. And as you see in Rat Park, Professor Bruce Alexander really explained how scientifically alcoholism is more of a choice within the mind than a disease that someone cannot control. It can be controlled. And even back in history, you can obviously see it as well. And that is pretty much my speech, and thank you very much.
Structural stuff at the beginning is solid. The proposition's clear. I know what the supporting points are going to be. You kind of give us an explanation about why there's a controversy on this. Maybe a little bit historical information about how it ended up being classified as a disease by some people. And then you proceed to give us a criteria for disease. I think that your definition is okay, although it's not necessarily authoritative, and it sounds to me like there's some room for interpretation there. One of the things that I was wondering, for instance, when you mentioned, you can't choose a disease, you can't choose certain things. Lots of diseases can be avoided by changing your lifestyle. Would they not count as diseases? Things like lung cancer and obesity, for instance. If those are not diseases also, because of the same criteria that you have, the ramifications of your argument are even more significant. If those other things do classify as diseases, then why is that any different than alcohol? That's just a question that I thought of while I was listening to your speech. I'm sure that the response speaker will have some similar questions when they're making their arguments. You explained the concept on the first point. There's not really much evidence on it except the general inference that you're making based on the definition. I know the second point is there, but it seemed like it got buried and I didn't really catch a distinct signpost on it. It's really about the scientific studies and it's the rat studies, and that's the extent of the evidence that you have in the speech is mostly the rat studies. There's a little bit of historical reference that you make on the third point. I didn't catch sources on that, but on the rat study we got Alexander talking about what's going on. I think it's a big inferential leap to be going from rat behavior to human behavior. It's a starting point in the process. It just feels like there's a little bit less information here than you'd want to have to be convincing. There was some other, like if they followed up this with some kind of behavioral inventory of alcoholics, for instance, to see if they had similar sorts of behaviors, maybe that would reflect a little bit more what's going on in the rat study that's going on there. I thought your summary was pretty clear at the end of the speech. You struggled a little bit on the exit, but you did a good job generally talking to us. Thank you.